At 20 years old, I was working at a church, and I was working as kind of like a youth director, pastor, intern type role with junior high and high school students. I'd started doing that at 18 years old, and at 20, I was working with junior high and high school students, and one of my favorite things about junior high and high school is that they generally will ask the questions that most adults aren't willing to ask. They're the questions that all of us wonder about the Bible and about God and about Christianity, but many of us were too afraid to ask it because we might look dumb. But junior hires and high schoolers, they enjoy asking. They're trying to stump you. They're wrestling through it themselves, and they're just excited to kind of ask those hard questions. And oftentimes, they would ask questions that I didn't have answers for. I'd be like, oh, that's a really good question. I'll go figure it out. Let me go do some research. We'll come back next week, and we'll chat through it. One of the websites and ministries that I followed pretty closely back then was a ministry called Reasonable Faith. The guy who led it was Dr. William Lane Craig. He is a philosopher, Christian theologian. He's got a PhD in philosophy and a PhD in theology. Smart dude. I genuinely believe he's one of the smartest guys alive still today. And I would go to his website after a kid would ask a question, and I'd be like, hey, what this verse, and see if he had something already answered on his website. And oftentimes he did. And I remember there was one specific question. I can't remember what the question was, but it was such a difficult question, I couldn't figure it out. And I went to Dr. Craig's website, and he had this phenomenal explanation of this difficult passage in the Bible. And as I read it, I was like, oh, this is so helpful. I'm stoked. And then I saw at the top right corner of the website, donate now. And I was like, I kind of feel like I should. Like this, I've been using this dude's website for 2 years. I'll give him $5, right? So I donate now. I was 20, not making much money at the church. As I press donate now, I type in my $5 and I just say, God bless. Sure enough, after I send the $5 in, I become a donor on their sponsor list. So I get weekly emails as a sponsor of Reasonable Faith Ministries. Little do they know I gave $5, but I'm lumped in with the generous supporters that give monthly. And a few weeks after that, I got an email. I was sitting at my desk, and I got an email and said the first 50 people who respond to this email are going to have the privilege of a free dinner in Dana Point, filet mignon lobster, overlooking the water with Dr. Craig. I answered within seconds. I didn't know who I was taking. Sarah and I had just started talking like a week before. I felt like it'd be a weird first date. So I ended up taking my buddy Dylan, who was studying philosophy with me. And we say, I email, I'm like, I'm in, let's go. So they don't know who this Brad Sarian is, but I show up with my buddy Dylan, and here we are, the youngest dudes by far. It's a room primarily 50s, 60s people. They're dressed way better than we ever are. And you can tell these are the people who are supporting Dr. Craig's ministry. I'm praying to God they don't ask how much you've given to be at this $300 dinner because I've only given $5. And so I'm a little nervous and hoping this doesn't happen. So we walk in, we get there early. There's about 8 to 10 tables. All of them are empty at that point. There's one woman sitting at one table there. And so my buddy Dylan and I, we walk up to the table, we sit next to her, and we just start chatting with her. Over the next 45 minutes or so, the tables start filling up. Everyone starts coming in and seated. And the only person who's out there is Dr. Craig. And we're all waiting. Like every time the back door opens, we're just like kind of all, just looking to see is he going to come down from the ceiling? Like how's he going to show up this evening? And sure enough, he walks in the back door and we all see Dr. Craig. I mean, this is like a hero of mine. And he walks in the door and I'm wondering where he's going to end up sitting. And he starts walking closer and closer and closer. And sure enough, there's an empty seat next to the woman we sat next to. And he walks up to that woman, gives her a kiss on the cheek, and we find out that's his wife. And he sits down at our table. And I'm kicking my buddy under the table like, oh my gosh, like Dr. Craig. And I'm assuming at this point he's going to say a quick, hi, good to see you all. I need to work my rounds. You guys don't look like you give much. I'm going to kind of go sit somewhere else, right? That's what I'm assuming is going to happen. He sat at that table talking with my buddy and I, college students, for 2 hours straight. At his dinner that's a sponsor to welcome and thank the sponsors of his ministry, he did not get up other than to present for 20 minutes, came back, sat at our table, and sat there and asked us questions for 2 hours. What's it like studying philosophy at university right now? What are you guys struggling with? How's this going? Have you read this book? We chatted for 2 hours. It was one of the greatest nights of my life. It was so fun talking with him. I know some of you are like, that sounds awfully boring. It was phenomenal. And now years removed, that story just gets more beautiful to me. The more I understand a little bit more about how the world generally works, the more I've been in rooms with wealthy and influential people and see how they generally operate, who they talk with, how they look over people's shoulders. I go back to that night and I'm just amazed that he sat there with us for a couple of hours, humbly serving us. I mean, I even look back and I go, we barely asked him any questions. We just wanted to tell him how awesome we were. And he sat there patiently and just listened. One of the smartest guys on earth listened to 2 college students at a sponsorship dinner for him. And I was amazed by it. It's a story that still has power to change me, to remind me what it means to be a person that could have influence and still talk with those who aren't like that. Today, as we dive into John chapter 13, we're going to see a story of Jesus doing something infinitely greater than sitting with a couple college students. Jesus is going to humble himself in such a way that I believe that if we grasp this story in John 13, it can change us. It can change us into the people of love as we see that the King of love met us, served us, and humbled himself beautifully. If you have a Bible, run to John chapter 13. We're going to cover the whole chapter today, so there's a little bit of work to do, but it is a phenomenal, phenomenal passage. John 13, verse 1 says this, and we should have the verses on the screen. Thank you. Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. Now, when it was time for supper, the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas, Simon Iscariot's son, to betray him. Jesus knew that the Father had given everything into his hands, that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. So, he got up from supper, laid aside his outer clothing, took a towel and tied it around himself. Next, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who asked him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered him, "What I'm doing you don't realize now, but afterward you will understand." "You will never wash my feet," Peter said. Jesus replied, "If I don't wash you, you have no part with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not only my feet, but also my hands and my head." "One who's bathed," Jesus told him, "doesn't need to wash anything except his feet, but he is completely clean. You are clean, but not all of you." For he knew who would betray him. This is why he said, "Not all of you are clean." This kicks off the last 24 hours of Jesus' life. I wonder if you knew, more specifically, the last 12 or so probably hours of his life. If you knew you had 12 hours left to live, how would you spend them? 12 hours, that's it. And then you die. I imagine maybe dinner with friends would be in there, but would washing your friends' feet make the list? Wouldn't cross my mind. Hasn't crossed my mind in decades, let alone the last 12 hours of my life. And Jesus knows he's approaching the cross. It's going to take place the next morning. Knowing this, that's what's so fascinating about verses 1 to 3. He knows all of this. And then that word "so," and I have that circled in my Bible, so he got down and began to wash their feet. And he gets to Peter. As you can imagine, this is a wild moment. Like maybe they were talking, having a good time, sitting at the table, and all of a sudden Jesus takes off his outer robe, ties it around his waist, and starts going one by one to his disciples and starts washing their feet. Now, this task was reserved for the servant of the house, the lowest of the low. Our feet are a lot cleaner these days than feet 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years ago, you probably wore sandals if you had sandals, and you walked on roads that weren't probably paved, where donkeys and horses walked before you. There'd be mud, there'd be poop, there'd be dirt. Your feet would be nasty. And you'd be walking into a home, and generally the person at the lowest of the totem pole would wash the feet, generally a servant of the house. Somehow, all of the disciples and Jesus get to the dinner portion, and no one's washed their feet. And if we track this story with the same story in Luke 22, right after the Lord's Supper, we see that the disciples start arguing about who's the greatest, which is the best. Jesus is constantly telling them to serve one another. And the disciples keep getting into this debate. Who do you think is number two? Obviously, Jesus is number one. But who's number two? Me? You? Who is it? I imagine, and this isn't in John, but I imagine that might be what triggers Jesus. He's just done the supper. He's talking about servanthood, about love, being the greatest as a servant of all. They're debating who's the greatest, and then Jesus gets down on a knee and begins washing their feet one at a time. And he gets to Simon Peter, who we love. And he gets to Peter, and I wish I could get in Peter's mind. I mean, it seemed like maybe he premeditated this. Maybe there were 4 other dudes in front of him. And he's like, these guys allowing Jesus to wash his feet. Watch this. And he gets to Peter, and he goes, you will never wash my feet. And Jesus, instead of going, thank you, Peter, wow, you get it, you win, you're it. Jesus says, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. And then Peter flings to the other extreme, okay, wash me all. I need everything from head to toe, clean me. And Jesus is like, no, come back here, Peter. Like you've already been washed. All you need is your feet. You've been cleansed. I think this is a picture. Baptism cleanses us. Salvation cleanses us. It's a once and for all cleansing, and yet daily we need constant cleansing. That's what Jesus is offering and showing us in this picture. And yet he says, but one of you is going to betray me. Not everybody in this room is clean. He washes Judas's feet. And he continues on in verse 12. When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, Do you know what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you also should do just as I have done for you. Truly I tell you, a servant is not greater than his master, and a messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, you're blessed if you do them. I'm not speaking about all of you. I know those I have chosen, but the scripture must be fulfilled. The one who eats my bread has raised his heel against me. I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you will believe that I am he. Truly I tell you, whoever receives anyone I send receives me, and the one who receives me receives him who sent me. So Jesus finishes washing the disciples' feet, and then he teaches them what he did. He says, you call me master, you call me Lord, you call me teacher. You're right in saying that. That's what I am. And you're not greater than I am. But look how I use my greatness. I serve. I wash your feet. I cleanse you. I do the job of the servant. This is what it looks like in the kingdom. You need to get this right. This is 3 years into the discipleship's journey with Jesus. Day in and day out. You think it would sink in yet, and it hasn't. It's an encouragement for us. Some of us have been walking with Jesus for 3 years, for 30 years. It takes time because we're so influenced by our world. And this is so the opposite of the world. It's the exact opposite of the world. At that dinner party, I would not have been surprised if Dr. Craig had shown up, seen us at the table, and been like, hey, honey, we need to go sit at another table. It would have been like, bummer, but yeah, that makes sense. But instead, he sat. It makes sense if Jesus said to, hey, Peter, you struggled today, you wash our feet. You drew the short straw. He doesn't do that. He goes, I'm the greatest, so I will serve. And then he predicts Judas's betrayal. He explains a little bit more here, verse 21. When Jesus had said this, he was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly I tell you, one of you will betray me. The disciples started looking at one another, uncertain which one he was speaking about. One of his disciples, the one Jesus loved, who we believe is John, the author of this, was reclining close beside Jesus. Simon Peter motioned to him to find out who it was he was talking about. So he leaned back against Jesus and asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus replied, he's the one I give this piece of bread to after I've dipped it. When he had dipped the bread, he gave it to Judas, Simon Iscariot's son. After Judas ate the piece of bread, Satan entered him. So Jesus told him, what you're doing, do quickly. None of those reclining at the table knew why he said this to him. Since Judas kept the money bag, some thought that Jesus was telling him, buy what we need for the festival, or that he should give something to the poor. After receiving the piece of bread, he immediately left, and it was night. I hope you use your imagination when you read the scriptures. I mean, this moment is so beautiful. You have Jesus reclining at the table. They're all reclining at the table, and John, the disciple whom Jesus loves, is leaning up against Jesus. I was watching an interview recently, and there were two people talking, and they were talking on a couch, two guys. And they were like close enough on the couch that they were kind of like rubbing shoulders constantly as they talked. And I watched, I was like, that looks awkward. It just looks weird. Like there's a big couch and they're kind of in the middle and they're just talking. They're like talking to each other and it was like really close. And it was like, just felt awkward. And then I read this story that same day. John is leaning up against Jesus. Like intimately, he loves him and is loved by him. And when Jesus says that someone is going to betray me, Peter, wherever he's sitting at, he motions to John, John, ask Jesus, who's going to betray? Which is amazing. There's like 12 of them in this room. It's not like a huge party of a few hundred, TV's on, music's playing. Like Jesus just said something staggering that makes the room go silent. And Peter's like, John, like, let us know who it is. And John leans back and goes, Jesus, who are you talking about? Now this is staggering as well. I think many of us, if you grew up in the church, the name Judas, you hear the word Judas and you just go, ooh. It's like, bad, right? Like you know Judas was the bad guy. I kind of get the picture like of Aladdin, the old school Aladdin, Jafar. Like every time Jafar shows up, his eyes are red. And you're like, even as a 4-year-old, you're like, I think that's the bad guy. Like red eyes, snake tongue, you're like, I think he's not up to good. I think many of us view Judas that way. Every time that we're reading the story of the scriptures, we see Judas and we're like, shady Judas. When Jesus says one of these guys is going to betray me, one of you, my closest friends, one of you is going to betray me, this is not what the disciples do. Judas has to be shady. We've known it all along. They are dumbstruck. They are, wait, who here could do that to you, Jesus? Who could betray you? And so Peter asked John. John's like, who, Jesus? He says, the one I dip this bread into the cup and give it to. Jesus takes the bread. He dips it into the cup. He hands it to Judas. Judas takes it, and then Jesus says, whatever you're going to go do it quickly. Judas gets up and leaves, and the disciples are still confused. They're like, I wonder where he's going. This is how impressive Judas must have been. This is how fake Judas must have appeared. That even when Jesus is clearly saying, this is the one who's going to betray me, when I give it to him, you will know, gives it to him, and they're like, I'm confused. Like Jesus has some confusing teachings, that one's not confusing. And yet they're shocked. This is one of the challenges of Christian community. We don't know one another's hearts all the time. Sometimes we are deceived by people. Sometimes someone who looks like they're impressive. We've seen so many Christian leaders over the years who we thought were amazing from their YouTube channel. Comes out that they are horrific people who've been abusing people, taking advantage of people, stealing money from people. It's one of those moments, and we go, you? Would we constantly be checking our own hearts? The story continues, verse 31. When Judas had left, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Children, I'm with you a little while longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so now I tell you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new command. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. This is what Pastor Andy Stanley calls the platinum rule. Many of us know the golden rule, do unto others what you would like them to do unto you. Jesus ups the golden rule and says, do to others what I've done for you. What's Jesus done? Everything. In just a day, he's going to die for us. This kind of love is so scandalous, it's so extreme that Jesus is even able to say, this is a new command. I mean, you can read the Bible. You're commanded all over the Bible to love each other. This is not some New Testament, new teaching. This is Old Testament as well. And yet Jesus says, I have a new command for you. Love the way I've loved you. This type of love knows no ends. And it ends with this. Verse 36. Lord, Simon Peter said to him, where are you going? Jesus answered, where I'm going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow later. Lord, Peter asked, why can't I follow you now? I will lay my life down for you. Jesus replied, will you lay your life down for me? Truly, I tell you, a rooster will not crow until you've denied me 3 times. So Jesus said, I'm going. He's told his disciples over and over and over that he's going to die. And it's hard for them to comprehend. He's supposed to be the Messiah. He's supposed to be the King of Israel. Kings don't die. You can't deliver a people by dying. This would be as wild as a president running for president, be like, I'm running for president, but I'm going to die tomorrow. But I'll be president. You're like, that doesn't make any sense. This is what the disciples are wrestling through. You're claiming to be the Messiah. We believe you're the Messiah, but you keep talking about dying. We don't get it. Where are you going? We want to go with you. He says, you can't go yet, but eventually you will. After the resurrection, after I give you my spirit, you will follow me, Peter. Peter goes, I'm willing to lay my life down for you. And Jesus asked that heart-wrenching question. Will you, Peter? It's almost like you get this idea. It's like, Peter, you still don't get it. I'm going to lay my life down for you first. Like, you can't lay your life down for me yet. You will. Peter's going to die. Church history tells us Peter is crucified upside down next to his wife years later. Jesus goes, you will die for me, Peter, but I'm dying for you first. John in this chapter is helping us see that with just hours to go before the cross, Jesus is still filled with an infinite amount of love and humility. I think for many of us, if we knew we had 12 hours left, it'd be kind of an opportunity for us to be like, all right, I've tried to be loving, I'm going to be selfish for 12 more hours. Whatever I want, I'm getting. And John is going out of his way to say he has 12 hours left, and all he does is pour himself out for others. All he does is lay his life down. He kneels and he washes dirty, filthy feet with hours remaining in his life. And then at the end, he commands us to love the way he's loved us. This is what is essential in this chapter. To understand that we cannot go out and love and serve the world until we have first been washed and served and loved by Jesus first. It's so easy to focus on this. There are a lot of commands in the Bible to love, to serve, to forgive, to do a lot of stuff. And it's easy for us as human beings to take these things and think, okay, I'm just going to start doing these things. I've got to start working on these things. I've got to become this type of person. And Jesus lovingly and graciously comes to us over and over and over and says, you can't give what you don't have. You must first receive my love, then you can go give it. Many of us are trying to give and pour out without ever receiving. Or maybe we received one time back at baptism, but we haven't continually received his love of his washing of our feet. And so I want to unpack this for a little bit because I think that it's so crucial for us. And I honestly, as I was prepping this week, I felt like this is such a basic kind of intro to Christianity sermon, yet I don't feel like we've talked about it in a little while. It's easy for me to even begin to assume, we talked about that a couple years ago. We're good. We need this. I need this every single day. That in order to love others, we need to first be loved. David Brooks, in his book, The Second Mountain, he was a New York Times columnist. I was following his story for a little while. I think he's now a Christian. And when he wrote this book, he was like on a journey from atheism, agnosticism to Christianity. It was fascinating. But he says this brilliant line. He says, individualism says you have to love yourself first before you can love others. But the Second Mountain ethos, which is his book, which is a way you could say the Christian life, the way he describes some of it. But the Christian life says you have to be loved first so you can understand love. I love that. It says our current culture of individualism says, sorry, I can't love the world yet. I need to love me first. He says, no. The true reality is you need to be loved first in order to love others. And this is what Jesus is offering us. He's going, I need to love you. I need to wash you. I need to clean you in order for you to go and do these things. And if we can be honest, I think for many of us, receiving his love is more difficult than giving his love. This is what Peter's struggling with. Jesus shows up to wash his feet, and Peter's like, never. I cannot allow you to wash my feet. Peter, the guy in just a few verses, is going to say, I'll die for you. Peter has no issue doing stuff for Jesus. I will give my life for you, Jesus. But Jesus goes, hey, I need to wash your feet first. He goes, nope, not happening. Jesus says, no, you don't get it. You have to receive my love first before you're going to end up dying for me. You have to receive my cleansing first before you can go out and try to do any work of cleansing in the world. This is what makes Christianity so difficult. It's that you have to receive free grace. So many of us think like, oh man, Christianity is hard because you got to do a lot of stuff. You are invited into a life of works, absolutely. But I believe the hardest work is to receive his work on your behalf. We experience this often in our culture when Christmas comes around. Have you ever been there where Christmas maybe passes a week or two and someone you see, it's like, hey, I got you a present. And the first thing you think is, I didn't even think about getting you anything. But it's past Christmas. You can't pretend like, hey, yours is coming. Just you wait for yours. It's like January 3rd. And you're like, yeah, thank you. What's the gift? And it's something outrageously gracious. That's hard to receive. Our brains are wrapped up in, oh no, I didn't do this for them. Oh my gosh, I can't accept this. I'll give it back. I'll return it, and I'll get them something bigger next year. And the person just wants you to receive a gift. They're graciously giving you a gift for you to take. And it's like, no, I can't. This is what Jesus comes to us over and over and over and goes, will you receive my love? And we're like, I'll wash your feet. I'll die for you. He's like, let me wash your feet. Let me forgive you. Let me cleanse you. Let me clean myself a little bit first. This is the same conversation we have with so many people before they get baptized. I can't get baptized yet. I gotta do 4 things. No, you get baptized first as a beautiful picture that Jesus cleanses you exactly where you are. Then you can start working on those 4 things. Jesus doesn't need your help. He wants to wash you and cleanse you first. He wants you to receive his love first. This is contrary to every other religion out there. Every other religion, in a sense, says, you wash God's feet first, then he'll wash yours. Christianity flips everything upside down and says, God has come down to wash you first. And then he invites you to go wash others. If I can be honest, man, sometimes I look at the other religions and I'm like, I think I do pretty good. Like, give me 8 things to do. I'll put that on a list and crush it. But Jesus comes to me and says, will you receive my love? It's like, you don't know what's in here, Jesus. This is really, really difficult. Filled with shame, filled with pride, filled with all these different things. To let us get to a spot where we would just receive his love. Tim Keller, brilliantly, in a sermon he preached on this passage, talks about why Peter had such a difficult time allowing Jesus to wash his feet. He says, Peter has a great deal of trouble understanding what would cause a person seated at the table of honor to do something so strange and weird. So he says, get up, Jesus. What are you doing this to me for? Peter doesn't see his need. If you also find the idea of Jesus having to die for you, to pay your penalty so that you could be accepted by God, do you feel like this is a repugnant doctrine? You might say to yourself, oh, I'm not that bad. I don't need Jesus to wash my feet or to die for me. See, here is your problem. The reason you can't find God is not because Jesus is too far away and too high, but because he's too near and too low. So many of us talk about pursuing God, trying to find God. Here is God on a knee washing our feet. Will we let him? Will we let him forgive us? Will we let him lead us? Will we allow him to cleanse us without any excuses? And go, Jesus, I am all yours. In order to do this, we do have to allow him to define what love is. Love isn't just a mushy feeling. It's ultimately doing what's best for someone else. And this is what Jesus has done. He's done what's best for us. He served us to the point of death. And then we have to get to a spot where we acknowledge that we need this. And not just one time in salvation, but every single day. I believe what Jesus is talking about is that baptism that cleansed Peter to where he's like, all right, clean me again. And Jesus is like, you're good. I've already done that. I've cleansed you. But today you need your feet washed. And tomorrow you're going to need your feet washed. And the next day you're going to need your feet washed. Do we grasp that we need our hearts, our bodies, our minds constantly being washed by Jesus and his word? Not just a once and for all, but for all time. And once we receive his love, then we can begin to give his love. Look back at John chapter 13. I want you to grasp how he then, once we receive his love, he says, now go and give it. Verse 12. When Jesus had washed their feet and put on his outer clothing, he reclined again and said to them, Do you know what I've done for you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you're speaking rightly, since that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you also should do just as I have done for you. And then if you skip down a bit to 34, he says, I give you a new command. Love one another. Just as I have loved you, you are also to love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So how do we give love to people? I really believe if you have any self-awareness, you understand how hard it is to genuinely love people, especially those that are close to you, right? Family members, friends, roommates. It's kind of easy to love people out there, but difficult to love sacrificially the people who we're close with. How do we do it? How do we love our coworkers? How do we love our neighbors? How do we do this? Well, Jesus says, you do it as I've loved you. I think one of our temptations is like, I'll love them if they deserve it. Like, I'm really good at loving people when they're lovely. And Jesus goes, no. You love them in order to make them lovely. That's what he's done with us. When he's lining the disciples up to wash their feet, he doesn't go, you're nice and lovely, I'm going to wait on you. He washes all of their feet, including Judas's. This is how we must constantly retrain our brains and our hearts around, I'm called into a life of love, and I'm called into this life of love not because these people necessarily deserve it, but because he loved me when I didn't deserve it. This is the only way you can constantly pour out love. If you aren't receiving his love, you can't give it. You can give it for a little bit, but you're going to get to like 6 or 7 marks on the other person and be like, that's enough. I'm done. And instead of calculating all the ways they've wronged you, how annoying they are, how wrong they are about politics and religion and everything you can imagine, we go, how has Jesus loved me when I was wrong about everything? He gave his life for me. I receive his love. This is the only way I believe marriage can work. I've been asked several times, how can you do marriage? How do you keep forgiving? How do you keep loving your spouse? I can't other than receiving his love. A lot of marriages go into a place where it's like, I'll receive your love and I'll give you love. That works for about 3 months. And then the wells dry up and it's like, sure, there's no more love. I don't know where to get love. I don't know how to give love. That's it. Christian love is, I'm loving you not because I'm getting love from you, but because I'm getting love from him. I'm being reminded that he loves me at my worst. I'm reminded that he loves me when I'm sinful, so I can keep pouring my love out on you. And it's that love that changes us. It's his love that changed me. It changed you. This is the type of love we're talking about. And so it's essential for us to understand this, and yet pride is one of the greatest blockers of loving deeply. Paul Miller, in his book, Love Walked Among Us, which I just absolutely love, he says, when we realize that we don't have it all together, we can care for people because we no longer feel morally superior to them. Knowing we are inadequate before God and other people leads to compassion, but thinking we are good before God and others makes us self-centered and difficult to live with. The better we think we are, the less we can love. The more we see our need, the more we'll turn for help, and the more we'll help others because we are able to see their need. We want to be a people who are repenting of our pride, repenting of our shame, repenting of anything that's getting in the way of us viewing ourselves as above others. One of the ways you can know whether or not you're truly being a servant is how do you act when someone treats you like a servant? Because off a sermon like this, we'd be like, I'm going to be a servant today. And then your spouse or your kids or your roommate treats you like a servant tonight. You're like, nah. I dictate when I'm a servant. You don't. I tell you when I'm a servant. You don't treat me like a servant. Jesus is going, no, you are a servant. And even when you're treated like a servant, you will find joy in that because that's what the King of Kings has done. He's come and blessed those who serve others. When I was in South Africa a couple of weeks ago, I was on my flight from LA to Dubai, a 16-hour flight. God help us. And the way a few people in my section were treating the flight attendant was horrific. I mean, they acted like they owned her. The light went on every 4 minutes. Water. That was it. No, can I get a cup of water? Water. I was like, oh my gosh, I should have said something. I really should have. She was they serve you like 3 meals on a 16-hour flight. One of the meals, she came and she gave me my food. I just said, I am so sorry for the way that people have been treating you. It's very unfair, and I apologize for that. She has like tears in her eyes. She's like, I don't understand. People are just so mean. I was like, I'm sorry. You're loved. And she walked away. She's serving. People treat her like a servant. It's unfair. As Christians, we should be putting ourselves into positions where we're serving others, but we can do it joyfully, not because we don't deserve them to be yelling at us water. Please hear me. That's not the way any human being should be treated. Jesus shouldn't have washed their feet either. And yet the life of a Christian is a servant who is able to joyfully wash the feet of other people. Serving in the workplace, serving in the home, not counting how many times the toilet paper roll has been not changed, but finding joy and going, I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do this again because Jesus loves me and he's for me, and he would change the toilet paper roll all the time for me. And we find the joy in him, not in other people. And the last thing is Jesus' way of helping us see that this love is not just for us, it's for the world. He says it's by this that they will know you're my disciples. That our love, our servanthood is actually to be a huge picture and declaration to the world. We have a different king. While it's devastating this flight attendant was treated so poorly, what would it have looked like if she was able to take those pathetic people yelling at her, demanding things of her, and her to be able to go, absolutely, I'd love to get you some water. Would they continue treating her like that? Maybe. But would some other people on the flight be like, what does she have that I don't have? What if I were her, I'd be throwing water in their face. People are watching. I was watching. We watch the way others are treated. We watch the way others serve. And Jesus is saying, if you can love others, if you can serve others, the world is going to see and they're going to go, how do you not respond that way? How do you joyfully continue to serve people who don't deserve to be served? This is your opportunity to not go, because I'm nice, but to go, because I have a king who loved me and served me when I don't deserve it. And so now it's my joy to love and serve them. Yeah, I don't like that they do this. I'd prefer them to ask politely. But sometimes with my king, my God, I'm not very polite with him. Sometimes I demand things of him. And even in his grace in those moments, he comes to me, he loves me, and he washes my feet. And so I'm practicing becoming a type of person who could do that with others when they do the same to me. When we grasp that God even loves that person who's demanding, it creates in us a love for others. I know I've told this story before, but my wife and I, this was a few years ago, we were having a little argument. It was our last argument 3 years ago. And it was one of those arguments that I was pretty set. I was 100% right on. It doesn't happen all the time, but it was like, I've won this. I'm right. I just need to give time to explain how I'm right. And as I'm doing that in an unloving, unkind way, as clear as day, I hear Jesus tell me, I love that girl. And my flesh goes, no, you can't. She's wrong. Yeah, are you not hearing my arguments? Like these are really good. And he just says, I love that girl. And in that moment, I'm now faced with a choice. It's Jesus and my wife versus me. Like, am I going to keep going? Am I going to be like, all right, let's do this? Like, the King of Kings is on her side. The King of Kings loves her deeply, even if she was wrong, even if she wasn't kind to me in that moment. He loves her.
He laid his life down for her. He died for her. He's washed her feet. Who am I to try to win? Who am I to try to domineer? Who am I to try to get her to serve me when what I should be doing is going, here's love. Here's service because I've been loved, because that king who loves her deeply loves me as well. And he loves you as well. And as we receive his love, we become people of love. Let's pray. I want to have us sit for just a second with our eyes closed. Louis is going to strum a little bit on the guitar, but I want us to use our imagination for a moment. I want you to imagine you are there on that last night with Jesus, that you're one of his disciples and sitting in that upper room. You're in the middle of dinner. You've just had some bread, some fish, some lamb, maybe some wine or some grape juice, depending on your preference. You're sitting there with Jesus Christ. Maybe when you walked in, you noticed your feet were a little dirty. There wasn't anyone to wash your feet at the door, and you're kind of confused, but you look around and you're pretty convinced you're not the lowest on the totem pole, so you feel fine. And you're just kind of waiting to see if somebody else is going to jump in. But that thought passes. Now eating dinner, Jesus is sharing his heart. He keeps talking about tonight's his last night before he goes to the cross. He's in mid-sentence and he just stops. Gets up, walks to the corner of the room, grabs some water. He grabs this bowl, this basin, starts to take off his outer robe. As you start seeing him do that, your stomach gets a little weak. You're hoping he's not going to do what you think he might do. Maybe he's going to give the bowl to somebody, maybe to me, maybe to you, and ask us to wash the feet, teach us something through it. But he fills the basin up. As you're sitting there, he comes right to you. Starts to take your shoes off. Takes your sandal, your socks, whatever you had on. Right now, he begins to take them off, and you don't know what to do. Maybe you do know what to do. What's going on in your heart? What's going on in your mind as the King of Kings, God in the flesh, is on a knee right in front of you, taking your dirty feet, puts them in a bowl, begins washing. Would you just quietly right now, in your own heart, not out loud, just talk to Jesus for a minute? Give him your fears, give him
washing is just a small glimpse of what you accomplished at the cross. And yet there's so much power in this. Maybe for some of us, we're like, yeah, of course Jesus could die for me, but I don't think he can wash my feet. Jesus, would we let you cleanse us day in and day out? Would we be honest with you? Would we confess our fears? Would we confess our hesitations? Would we confess our doubts? All of it to you. As we're talking to you, crying out to you, we aren't even looking up in that moment. We look down at the King who humbles himself and serves us and shows us what true greatness is. Thank you. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your grace. Would we be people who extend this love to others? Daily we receive your washing of us, knowing the dirt, the secrets, the ugliness inside us that you love to wash clean and bring into the light. And then you send us. You go with us and you send us into the world so that we would do the same, so that other men, women, and children would encounter the King who washes their feet. We love you. Trust you. So be